Hooks allow modules to alter and extend the behavior of Drupal core or another module. They are one of the various ways that code components in Drupal can communicate with one another. In this tutorial, we're going to define what hooks are and how they work. Then we'll talk a bit about the use case for hooks and when you might want to consider using them. Finally, we'll talk about the various types of hooks that you will end up working with as a module developer. You can think of hooks as being points in the execution of code where Drupal pauses for a moment and says, "Hey, does anyone have anything they want to add here?" And then any enabled module can optionally reply and say, "Why yes, I do." A simple example might be when a user cancels their account. They click the account cancel button and Drupal goes through the process of deleting and cleaning things up. It then pauses and says, "If anyone cares, Joe just deleted his account. Here's his ID, and some other useful information. Do with it what you will." And all the enabled modules say, "Oh, good to know, thanks. I've been storing a profile picture for him. I'll go ahead and clean that up now too." Or, "Oh, thanks. Looks like we've got his email address, so I'll send a quick response saying, 'Thanks, can you fill out this survey?'" A more complex example would be when Drupal builds the form presented to a user to log in, and in the process triggers a hook which allows any enabled module to make alterations to that form. Add new fields, change the labels of existing fields, or more complex things like add an additional set of validation rules that ensures a user's username and password are not the same string. From a technical perspective, hooks are specially named PHP functions that are loaded into memory so they're available, then called at the appropriate time with a known set of parameters being passed in, and in some cases, an expected return value. Basically, Drupal loops through a list of all installed modules and says, does the function module name _ hook name exist? If so, go ahead and call it now. Why? To make it possible for Drupal's core functionality to be altered, extended, and enhanced all without having to modify existing code. Hooks were first introduced to Drupal very early on, around 2001 or so, at a time when PHP lacked a lot of support for object-oriented programming patterns. Since hooks rely only on functions and people's ability to follow a defined pattern, they worked really well. Essentially, what hooks allow for is the huge ecosystem of third-party modules that give Drupal its incredible flexibility, and for modules to exist and be used without having to hack core code. That means the Drupal core developers and Drupal module developers are free to both improve their own code in tandem without fear of breaking one another's functionality. It also gives module users the peace of mind of an easy update. Just drop in the new core code or the new module code, and things should continue to work just as before, with hooks serving as a sort of bridge between the two systems. Up until Drupal 8, hooks were the only means of extending Drupal. However, as PHP has continued to advance and as Drupal has begun to modernize its codebase a bit, we're seeing new patterns start to emerge. In Drupal 8, we've got both plugins and events in addition to hooks, and methods for bridging between the various code components that make up a Drupal site. Every individual hook consists of three main parts: a unique name. Hook names always start with the word hook and contain lowercase alphanumeric characters and underscores. Remember, they're going to become the name of a PHP function. A definition, which is the documentation that tells developers when the hook is triggered and what the parameters are and what, if any, return value is expected. And an implementation, the code responsible for triggering the hook at the appropriate time. I generally categorize hooks into three different types. I think this helps to better understand what kinds of hooks are available and when you should define new hooks in your own code. These three types are hooks that react to an event or action. For example, a user has just logged into the site and you want to perform some custom logic as a result. In Drupal 8, some of these actions are broadcast as events, and you need to create a subscriber, though in my experience, the majority of them are still hooks. Then, there are hooks that answer questions. These hooks generally return some kind of structured array that contains information describing something like the bundles for an entity type, or the variables that should be made available to a template file. In many cases, these end with an _info suffix. There are fewer of these in Drupal 8 as a result of the introduction of plugins, but there are still a lot. Then, there are hooks that alter existing data. For example, some code has built the array that defines a form, and before it's rendered to HTML, an alter hook gives everyone a chance to make changes to that form's definition. Let's look at a couple of examples real quick. Hook toolbar is an example of a hook that asks a question. Does anyone have items they would like to add to the toolbar? And the user module responds via its implementation, user_toolbar, this function defined in the user.module file. The code here, as you'll see, returns an associative array of items, including a link to log out, a link to edit your account, and more. along with additional information about icons and cacheability. You can see down here. This is an example of a hook that answers a question. Hook user cancel is an example of a hook that provides the opportunity to respond to an action. The action, in this case, a user account being canceled. Comment_user_cancel is an implementation of this hook that checks the cancellation method, and if necessary, either unpublishes or assigns to another user all of the comments created by the account being canceled. This is an example of a hook that responds to an action. And finally, hook_views_data_alter is an example of a hook that allows code to alter existing data. When the views module has gathered a list of all the data sources it knows about and is now allowing modules to change that list, the taxonomy views data alter function is an implementation of that hook that adds information about taxonomy terms to the existing list of fields available for nodes. You can see that code here. This is an example of a hook that alters an existing data structure. As a module developer, you can also define new hooks, and you should. It makes it easier to write code that can be reused and maintained over time. You get all the same benefits as Drupal core in that others can extend your custom code without modifying the code. Here's a few rules of thumb that I rely on for knowing self. You should probably define a new hook here. Anytime I'm compiling a list of something, whether that's records from the database or a hard-coded list of countries, I want to make sure that others have the chance to add new records to the list. And I have no idea what future me might need to add to this list or how I might want to add records. And then you probably want a corresponding alter hook that allows someone to modify the compiled list or any other complex set of data you're working with for that matter. For example, on the Drupalize.Me site, the configuration that gets fed into the video player is compiled by multiple modules. One adds the video, one adds the transcripts, and another changes settings for the theme. Then that data is altered, and a final module comes along and tacks on security credentials to all the URLs and that kind of thing. Also, another rule of thumb, anytime your module is performing some kind of critical operation, like for example saving things to the database, or handling responses from a third-party API, you might want to consider giving others the opportunity to react to those events and that data. This tutorial is a little long, but it covers a lot of really important information. As a recap, we said that hooks are specially named PHP functions that live in modules and are called at critical times during the execution of a code path. And then we defined their use case as a way for modules to alter, extend, and enhance Drupal without modifying existing code. Finally, we talked about various types of hooks. Hooks for answering questions, hooks for altering data, and hooks for reacting to events. You should now be able to take this high-level understanding of what hooks are and why they are useful and start learning more about implementing existing hooks and defining new ones.